Our fourth speaker is a gentleman who we will refer to as Mary's husband, and you'll learn why we reuse that kind of language. He will be talking about on a topic of grief and grieving. I want to introduce you to Mary's husband. Their love started in the world's most unconventional place, behind the razor wire of a maximum security prison. As they worked together side by side for almost 14 years, their bond developed and knew no end. Now, I must clarify that neither one of the two of them were convicts within this institution. All right? Mary's husband supported her unconditionally on the job, at home, while raising their children, of which they have 2, during her treatments to fight off metastatic breast cancer. Although Mary did not enter the gates of heaven until March 22nd, 2022, Mary's husband has dealt with the engine of grief since their initial diagnosis of stage 3 breast cancer in 2015. At first, the tentacles of his grief were so sinister, he was unaware how it affected all areas of his life. But as his grief evolved and morphed over time, Mary's husband found a way to crawl his way out of the grief's black abyss. Mary's husband is now using his life's experience to help others crawl out of their own personal hell. For the personal edification of your knowledge, Mary's husband is the warden of a maximum security prison, the largest in Connecticut. It is the privilege of our Leslie's Week team and all NBC caregivers who walk this journey to introduce you to Mary's husband.
In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, Heavenly King, please grant me the words to speak to our audience where they can understand the power of grief and the impact that it has in the lives of the men and the women affected by metastatic breast cancer. Grief will come like a tsunami in the night and will flee as quick as a hummingbird at the sun's rise. It comes without warning. It can be relentless and suffocating. For you to understand my grief, you have to first know what was taken from me and my family. And our lives started in the most unconventional place, prison. As any first responder knows, that the relentless environment in which we work in fosters uncanny bonding and relationships with the people we work beside. When I met my wife in 2008, there was no belief of where our life would take us. Our relationship started with professional respect. It turned into friendship and then into love. As our lives progressed together, we welcomed our family. We became married. We had children. We fostered a love that was unbreakable. We had our normal ups and downs as a family, but in 2015 came the life's decision that will always change our path. This decision came when our son, who was 1 at the time, immediately stopped nursing on her left side. My wife didn't think anything of it, but we ended up going to the doctor because it was time for her annual mammogram. And like many other stories you heard today, the mammogram turned into a consultation. A consultation turned into a biopsy. And the biopsy turned into stage 3 breast cancer in 2015. From that point, we knew we were in the fight of our life. We knew that there was no bounds to what we had to do to keep our family together. Through countless rounds of chemotherapy, radiation, and 11 surgeries, we were able to get 4 years from the initial diagnosis. Then in 2020, the height of COVID, we changed oncologists and they conducted testing that was never done before. And we found out that she was now stage 4 metastatic in her bones. It's clear as day, I remember the doctor's words. When the cancer remains in the bones, you can live. The moment it goes into the organs, then we have to worry. The cancer remained in her bones until August 2021. Right before our Disney trip, we got a phone call from her oncologist after one of her 6-month scans. The cancer was now in her liver. Because the oral chemotherapy was no longer working, we went back to traditional IV chemotherapy. From that point, the cancer ravaged her body, her liver, and on March 22nd, 2022, she passed. She entered the gates of heaven as a fighter. She entered the gates of her heaven with our family present, my children present, and we were able to send her off with dignity and love. Grief is an enigma. Its definition is deep and poignant distress caused by bereavement. What I have learned is that there are multi-facets to grief. In my experience, there is grief of my old lives, who I was as a father, who I was as a provider, and who I was as a husband. During her treatment, but prior to her treatment, we had the ability to live life without carefree, to get up on a whim to go to New York, to get up and go and do whatever we asked and wherever we wanted. Once the cancer diagnosis came, it all changed. Then when the pandemic hit and I was no longer able to go to the doctor's appointments, I grieved not being able to be there for my wife. I grieved not being able to be there to hold her hand as that poison entered her veins in hopes of prolonging her life. Then after her death, I continued to grieve. Grief that was more terrible than the first set because she was no longer with us. Grief that no father, no husband should ever experience. Grief that is destructive. grief that evolves every day. As we grieve together as a family, we find new bonds and new meaning. Just like the definition of grief changed over time. When Dr. Kubler-Ross first presented the 5 stages of grief, it was monumental, it was changing, it was finally put a name to something that we did not know what it was. Grief used to be believed as a linear process. As we've gone on, as time has gone on, there is now a new belief of grief. Dr. David Kessler now has declared and believes there's actually 6 stages of grief. And this 6th stage of grief is meaning. That 6th stage of grief is to find meaning in life. Life that was lost, life that will never come back. It's what you make of your life. Your life is nothing but choices and consequences, risks and rewards. You can allow your grief to destroy you, to take everything that was dear, everything that you loved, or you can choose to find a meaning in your grief. The meaning that I have found for my grief is my children. My children have pushed me on days I didn't want to get out of bed. They have pushed me on days that didn't want to be a father without my wife. Grief can't take anything that you allow it to, but grief can also empower you. So for you to find that meaning in grief, you take a power back from what was taken from you. Grief is strong, grief is heavy. And we have a choice, and that choice that we have is to find our meaning. What I also found, which is worthwhile to speak about grief, as grief is different than trauma. Grief and trauma both have the power to destroy. The grief that I have at the loss of my wife is different than the trauma in which I experienced while watching my wife go through her treatment and her surgeries. It's different from the trauma of listening to my children tell mom it's okay to go to heaven while she's dying. It's different from watching the surgeries and having the doctor come out during one of the surgeries and say to me, Mr. Bonaventura, you have 5 minutes to make a decision and it will affect your wife for the rest of your life. That trauma is different than what grief is. In my professional environment, I have seen evil in its face. I have experienced violence, and I have seen trauma that no person should ever endure. But it wasn't until I experienced the trauma of losing my wife that I fully understood what it can do. The anxiety and depression it can cause, the anger issues, the complete loss of sense of self. Another thing about grief is that when people believe grief is present, they look to see if they can get through their grief, if they could press fast forward, anticipatory grief. Grief is not something that you can run through and hope you never go back to. Grief is not something that we can't force ourselves through. We have to allow ourselves to feel, especially during a loss of a loved one. As a correctional administrator, I come to you, as I say to my staff, I'm not going to just give you a problem. We talk a lot of deficiencies of what we found in the metastatic breast cancer community. But I also want to bring you solutions. So when you are on your journey, your very valuable journey of helping this platform, what can you do to get better? What can you do to better the lives of your patients, of your loved ones, of your caregivers? So one of the things that I believe that we can first acknowledge is that the power of credible messengers. Leslie's Week and Sandra brings the husbands and the families back who have lived experience with metastatic breast cancer so that we can share our experience with them. Credible messengers work because we know what they're going to go through. When we speak to the men and the women that are there, there is no question that we will walk that walk with them. So for the pharmaceutical and the medical community, find a credible messenger program, develop one, have them come into your organization, and give your current and active patients an opportunity to learn before experiencing, to understand what the families are going to go through. The next thing I would recommend is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. In the medical community, you have medical, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm a little all over the place, but I'm sorry, I wanted to ad-lib this and I feel like I'm letting you down, Sandra. I apologize. Well, anyways, at the end of the day, to move forward with this, we have to have extreme ownership. We have to take care of each other. And one thing that we need to experience or to acknowledge is that we can't do it alone. We can't have, I apologize, this is emotionally overwhelming. I sit on this stage and I look out into this community of loving and caring people that provide help. And I look at this chair, and this chair is sturdy, it is strong. And I like to use metaphors. And the seat of this chair carries weight. And then when I look at this medical community, the seat of the chair carries the women and families associated with metastatic breast cancer. And each leg of the chair holds up the seat. And when I think of the metastatic breast cancer community, the legs of the chairs are the pharmaceutical companies, who we have here, the medical community, which we have MedStar here, which we are very excited and happy that they're here, the national institutions or governments, and the insurance companies. And without them, we can't support this metastatic breast cancer community. And without one leg of the chair, everybody will falter. We can't sit. Our loved ones can't sit without everybody here. So when I look in this crowd, I ask myself, who's missing? Who needs to be at this table to support our metastatic breast cancer community? When we look around, we see a table that's missing. We have our medical community who's able to conduct clinical trials. MD Anderson, Dana-Farber, Sloan Kettering, Moffitt, Mayo Clinic. We have insurance companies like Anthem, Cigna, United Health. We have government agencies like the CDC, the World Health Organization. Where are you? Will you come and hear our children's voice? Hear their stories, the lives in which are destroyed by metastatic breast cancer? We invite you to be here because we can't do it without you. We know what needs to be done, but it can't be done without you. So, as I go back to the stage, I think about what else is left to do. And the only thing I could think of is my introduction. I am Mark Bonaventura. I'm the beloved husband of Mary Bonaventura, who was taken away by metastatic breast cancer in March 2022. I am the father of Mia and Michael, who I love with all my heart, and it is my only wish that they can move forward in life and be as strong as their mother. I'm a correctional professional for the Connecticut Department of Corrections, who I get to work alongside some of the best correctional staff in this country. I am a licensed clinical social worker who has dedicated his life to help first responders and caregivers and patients in the metastatic breast cancer community. And I'm a Leslie's Week speaker and volunteer. In closing, I will take and modify a poem written by Dylan Thomas, which says, "We will not go gentle into that good night. We will rage against the dying of the light. The only choice you have is, will you rage with us, or will you be the entity we rage against? The choice is yours." Thank you.